I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space where we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on this Noongar Budja for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with respect that I acknowledge the Menang people, their elders past, present and emerging. It is a real privilege to be here, to be able to live here and share this land. Michael, thank you so much for being here. So we tried to set something up earlier in the year with you and COVID bloody got in the way, but it's so wonderful that you're here. So thank you for joining us. And what a book. This has been fabulous. We've really, really enjoyed this month's read. Can you hear me okay?
It's very patchy. I might, if we have too much trouble, I might have to turn the video off. This free screen's mobile.
Everyone remember his handsome face now, all right? Okay. All right. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about young Michael. What were you like as a kid?
I grew up on a farm, but I was not a very good farm kid. I was much happier being inside, playing video games and reading and just Lego and all that sort of stuff. I can't help if I had to, but yeah, I was definitely a bookworm as a kid.
That's excellent. So what kind of things did you read as a kid?
Everything, basically, anything I was allowed to read. So I started off with the classics, little golden books, and then sort of progressed up to Enid Blyton, and then, just basically anything I could find, fantasy, Dragonlance, what else? Oh, I got a bit older, Dad threw me a Wilbur Smith book and said, here you go, read that, you might like it. Stephen King in high school, a lot of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Did Wilbur Smith carry on a bit, into adulthood, because you quite enjoy Wilbur Smith, is that right?
Yeah, not a hell of a lot, but more because I just sort of, reading went by the wayside as I sort of got older and then started doing, we were busy building our own little empire and I had other stuff to do. And I've only really recently in the last few years got back into reading, and most of that's through my ears in audiobooks as I'm sitting in a tractor at work.
Yeah, okay. So, and the tractor is a bit of a mobile office for you, right? So when you were conceptualising and indeed writing Ridgeview Station, did I get that title right? God, I hope I did. Ridgeview Station.
Yep.
Was a fair bit of that was done in the cabin of a tractor?
Not so much then, because back then we were on a station, so there was more. That one didn't take a hell of a lot of conceptualising because it was more or less of what we were doing, and I wrote it to promote the station at the time, and then my wife and I separated, and 12 months later I sort of polished this manuscript up and sent it off, and it got accepted, which was a bit of a shock. So.
Yeah, okay, because it's Ridgeview Station is a rural drama about the station work and everything, and Wild Dogs is an international crime. That's quite a jump in genres, right? So how did that feel as an author? Were there some learning curves with that?
Yeah, it was, and because Wild Dogs was my 5th or 6th manuscript, I was sort of writing 2 very different things at the same time. I get stuck on one and then come to this other one and come back as I sort of figured things out, which is the beauty of not having deadlines. You can do that.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'd written 3 other manuscripts in between, which I didn't have much luck sort of getting published. So I just kept writing, and Wild Dogs was something I basically wanted to try and do something that, say, Wilbur Smith might have written if he was Australian. That's that adventure in a big, vast landscape, and stuff happening to people who don't really expect it, and sort of survive, and chases through the scrub and all that sort of thing. So, So even though there's a big difference between the 2 stories, and I have seen people they've bought Wild Dogs, they've liked it, and then they've gone back to Ridgeview Station and gone, oh, that's a bit slower. I'm like, there's 5 or 6 years between those 2 stories, and there's a hell of a lot of words in between that's never going to see the light of day. But my writing's definitely changed a lot since Ridgeview Station.
So, because you've had a lot of different jobs in the time since you've been a writer, and before you were a writer, you farmer, pastoralist, FIFO kitchen worker at one point, I think. I read marine draftsman. Do you find that these different experiences have informed your writing? So do you take these experiences with you? Or is Michael Trant, the author, a whole new manifestation?
It's definitely, they're all definitely part of the experience. Like, I couldn't have written Wild Dogs 5 years ago because I hadn't worked on mines. I hadn't met a whole lot of many people from different parts of the world. It was very, very much my own circle in sort of the Midwest WA, and it's a very sort of very, very plain circle, if you know what I'm saying. Like, there's not many people around from different parts of the world. But when you're up on the mines, you're working with people that come across from everywhere. I've met a fella from Zimbabwe. I met people from Thailand originally, just anywhere and everywhere. And you start talking to them, and they tell you their story, and that's interesting. So Michael Trant, the author, is just who I am now, and that's just a sum of everything I've done leading up to this point. So Michael Trant, the author, in 5 or 6 years' time will probably be very different again.
Yeah.
Just depending what happens in the world. Like, I'm only ever going to be me. Like, it's not a front or a persona that I try and put out there. So if you go through all my social media, they're all the same. Like, just whatever I'm doing at the time. But funny enough, the whole idea behind the people smuggling thing came from when I was working in the boat builders. A crayfisherman turned up and he was complaining. I didn't have a hell of a lot of sympathy for him because I come off farms. Here's this guy turning up in a big F-350 complaining he's only making $1 million that year. This was back when there was quite a few boats being intercepted before the whole Manus solution. And he said, bugger the crayfish, and I should be bringing all these people into the shore. And I just remember thinking, well, your boat's perfectly set up for it. And you get up early in the morning and go, and no one would say boo, seeing you coming and going, and no one looks, and you're always at the wharf and things. Perfect. I just stuck in the back of my head. And then combined with other stuff that had happened, like there was a boat from Sri Lanka that turned up on the Gerald foreshore, just got lost and rocked up at the Dome Cafe in the morning, and like no one saw them coming. Like they weren't picked up on any radar or any border patrol. So that sort of set a little seed going, thinking back to what I thought about this crayfishing fella. And backpackers have been working up and down the coast. There was a raid on illegal workers who weren't working on visas, and it's all a big organised crime thing. There was a heap of fruit growers got busted for that. So the same thing, all these ideas you hear just sort of merge into one. But the main one was came from working on mines. I wanted someone from a part of the world who hasn't had much experience with other people from different parts of the world being thrown in with someone completely out of his world and probably got a few prejudices and preconceived ideas about what that person might be like. So that was where the relationship between Gabe and me came from. I wanted the two bouncing off each other.
Yeah. So with Amin, so he's Pushtun Sunni Muslim from Afghanistan. Throughout the book, you've got lots of Arabic praises and affirmations and things. How'd you go about writing that? Was that interesting? Did you have to get in touch with the community, or did you reach out to anybody to learn these sorts of phrases?
Initially when I was writing, I just used Google. I just Googled what would sort of like, what's a swear, what's an exclamation of surprise, what's the thing. But I'm very fortunate. I've got a very good friend of mine, Auntie Jahil. She's a Muslim. She's Muslim from Indonesia, I think, is her background. And she was a sensitivity reader for me. And she had a friend from Afghanistan. So between the two, they were able to direct me, because I only knew what I read off Google, and half the time what you read on there is wrong anyway. So I wrote it first, and then when it was picked up, I knew I'd have to go back and make sure it was all correct. So between Ray and a friend's work, we got the phrasing right. And then also Ray was very good with things, like I'd missed a couple of things. I just had to Google like what time's prayer, how many prayers do you have in a day, what do you do? I'd only ever seen it on the news, and generally that wasn't painted in a very good light then. So you had to be a bit careful what you were looking at trying to use. But he was very good with saying, he'd wash his hands first. And I, complete by accident, had already set up Gabe washing his hands under the ute when he was working the traps and things. So it was all there. She was able to point out there's a scene where he gives a thumbs up, and she said, well, that's actually like doing that. So I was able to use that. Yeah. I was able to use that later on as a bit of a joke and a thing. So yeah, no, it was Ray was very helpful. And when you're writing characters from you're not part of the community or very little experience with, you do have to be aware that you will have to go and make sure things are correct and right.
Yeah.
And yeah, just you've got to get things right. Otherwise, there's enough middle-aged white men writing rubbish out there at the moment with me adding to the file.
Yeah. I understand you're a big gamer. Is that right?
Yes, when I can. I'm actually these are my gaming headsets. So
Yeah. So, depending on the game that you're playing, I suppose, video gaming is essentially another form of storytelling. Do you think gaming has influenced your writing practice at all? Have you learnt things about storyline and taken it from gaming, or?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Like I say, there's the most popular games at the moment have heartbreaking stories in them, or just stories. And the same as watching a movie, when there's a character that you become attached to, next thing you know they're getting killed. It's like, hey, and it's not because you died in the game. Like that's the way the story went. This character you'd spent the last 30, 40 hours playing is suddenly dead. It's it's the same as reading a book. So it's just another medium of storytelling. Like obviously there's some games where it's just pure fun and adrenaline and running around, but I do enjoy a good story in a game. And if I find a game that I can get, like same as a book, some people pick up a book and they won't put it down until it's finished. Well, yeah, games can be like that too.
Yeah, yep. So in the acknowledgement section at the back of your book, you mention the WA and broader Australian writing community, and you thank them for their support. In our book club, Paperbark Book Club, we have a number of published writers, but for those of us who are not privy to the nuances of a writing community, can you elaborate on what kind of support you get and give and receive in the writing community, and what kind of relationships you have with other writers in Australia?
Yeah, so basically writers get it. Even as happy as your family and friends are for you when you get some good news, it's like, hey, I've just signed a publishing contract, or I've just signed with an agent. They're like, oh, that's great, that's awesome. But your writer mates will absolutely lose their shit. Like, they are just so pumped for you, so happy, because they know what it's like to be sending out all these queries and manuscripts and submissions and just either get nothing or a rejection or something. So they just know it's like anything, like an athlete. I'm sure their mates as athletes understand it better than we ever will, because I can only imagine what it's like to be training your guts out to try and make an AFL team and missing it by that much, and then all of a sudden you're picked up by another team. I imagine it'd be very similar feeling to getting a manuscript picked up. So, and they know what it's like, even though they know what it's like, everything from missing out on submissions to trying to write to a deadline. So if you've got writers who have been in that boat themselves, you can all sort of gather around and share sob stories, and it works both ways. So you can share in the joy, and you can also spread the misery around a bit, because it's a bit of both. It's quite up and down.
I was listening to a podcast last night, and John Waters was being interviewed. He's got a new book coming out later in the year called Lionmouth, and he was saying that a no is free. He said that he tries to not, put too much weight in the no's, because that's free. And I think what he was talking about was when you get the yes, then the effort comes and the time comes and the commitment comes and the deadline comes and things. So to not lose yourself on that no, but to And
quite often, it's not necessarily that your writing's bad or anything like that, but there is a lot of luck does come into it. I mean, I had one manuscript an agent was interested in, but she already had an author printing a very similar story about FIFO in the next 6 months. She said, look, it's not a bad manuscript. There's probably something here, but I just don't think I can do anything with this.
Yeah, okay.
And even my current agent, Alex, she'd read a fantasy stuff that I'd sent her. She said, look, there's nothing wrong with it. I like your humour, I like your style, but I just don't know what I can do with this.
Yeah.
So what else have you got? And that's when she got Wild Dogs. So a no's not always, no, you're right, it's crap. There's a number of reasons as to why they might not say no. Sometimes people just don't like the story, and it's not because it's a bad story. I've read books that I've couldn't really care for, but they're very highly rated. So that doesn't mean that it's a bad story. It just means it's not for me.
Yeah. I just want
And
to.
if you got to, you got to have that. Whoever takes you on, they've got to have that passion for that story. So if they're not feeling it, they're not going to be able to convince the publisher or marketing or whoever to spend the money on it. So
Yeah. I just want to let you know that I'm not making eye contact with you because you're on a lovely big screen. So I'm definitely paying attention. Yeah.
I think we're all used to Zoom meetings and everything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the story is beautifully bookended by an anthropomorphic monologue of a wild dingo. What made you choose to do this?
That was one of the last things I put into the manuscript. Actually, the very last thing I put in was the leave no sign, leave no trace that runs through the whole thing. Like I'd written it a couple of times, and then when I got to the end scene, I thought, that's a good little foreshadowing all the way up to the end. I'd written the final scene where the dingo makes the appearance, and I thought, it'd be really nice if we saw the dog at the start. And then one of my favourite authors, Andrzej Sapkowski, he's a Polish writer who writes the Witcher series, if anyone's familiar with that.
Yeah.
His books, he plays around with points of view and timeline jumps and everything a lot. And it's just, I found it really fascinating. There'll be a scene where it's like an old fella telling a bunch of children a fairy tale, and he's missing a hand, and then you go off and whatever he's talking about, that becomes the story, and a different narrator takes over that, but it's the same story. And then at the end, you realise the guy in the story's lost his hand, and it turns out it's the old fella who's been talking to the kids. So it's just the way he ties in stuff. And I thought, see if I can do that and have a talk. And it was just a nice way to break up the story, beginning, middle, and end, and sort of show, especially the middle one where he sees Chase discovering stuff without actually showing Chase discovering stuff, like from his point of view. So it was an experiment, and it seems to have paid off.
So do you like these characters? You know, we've got Chase, who was a great villain. He was bloody awful. He was great. You know, we've got quite complex characters there. You know, Gabe Ahern, there's quite a bit of moral ambiguity shrouding a lot of these characters, which makes them really complex and interesting, but also makes them really believable. What the authenticity in these characters, are these people, are any of these characters based on people you've met? Like, are they influenced by people that you know? Or is it, as you said before, just a combination of your different experiences?
Yeah, so Chase is pretty well made up, but he's sort of based on those sneering types of guys that they just sort of think they're a bit better than everyone else, and they're sort of quite dry and sarcastic and a bit sneering. You sort of meet him at the pub and you have a bit of a chat with him, you walk away and think, well, he was a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
And people probably say that about me sometimes too. But Gabe's a combination of old fellas I met in the bush when we were out there, and they just don't care. Like, they'll tell you to bugger off if you're annoying them, but they're quite good people at heart. They've just got no time for bullshit, and they'll let you know. And they've usually got quite strong opinions on certain subjects, but they'll quickly change their belief if they're shown differently. Like, they're not diehard racists or bigoted or whatever. They're just maybe never experienced or thought about things too much. And when they finally meet someone, say like meeting a refugee for the first time, well, what the hell did you get on a boat for? And they tell them, I'd probably get on a boat too.
That makes sense.
So, and like I'll put myself in that category too, because like I say, up until I've gone up onto the mines, I didn't really meet that many people from different backgrounds. And that was one of the main things I wanted in that story. Two people from very different backgrounds, and one of them going, maybe things aren't as simple and black as white as I might have thought they were.
Well, I mean, there's so much grey area in Gabe's thinking, isn't there? And clearly he has, as you say, this character, he's based on people who have seen a lot and really understand what it means to live in very isolated parts of our country. And that's a true reflection of living in these isolated parts, do you think? Like, that you need to know how to get yourself out of a jam, and you need to be able to bend the rules a bit to survive.
Yeah, I mean, when you're on your own and you're isolated out there, like it is interesting because if you don't get it done, no one's going to. Like, there's probably things that I've done that I've driven road trains and semi things around the station, but I haven't got a license to drive it. But it's private land, so you sort of, you know what I mean? Like it is technically you probably should have a license to drive these things around the station, but who's going to know? And as long as you don't crash it, you're fine.
Yeah.
And I mean, like it's one of those things that, you know, you probably should have a working at heights permit to go up a windmill, but people have been going up and down windmills for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And only a few fall off. Only a few fall off every now and then. But I was that scared of heights. I was never going to fall off because I didn't want to let go. I was trying to undo the bolt in my teeth. So, but yeah, it is. It's a reality. It's just the reality of living, especially when you're your own boss too. Like, you make the rules, so if you break the rules, well, you're breaking your own rules.
Yeah, it's your consequence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Annie Proulx is quoted to have said, "If you get the landscape right, the characters will step out of it and they'll be in the right place." What do you think of this statement? Because this really spoke to me in this book, Wild Dogs. Because a massive observation that we had, the book club, we were talking about it online together, the authenticity of your writing about the landscape and how the landscape is a character in itself. So, yeah, I wonder what you think about that statement, and also kind of what comes first for you in the hierarchy that you have of story development. Is landscape something that you really focus on and try and nail first, or do you kind of work on character development and it's because you know the sorts of things you're writing about so intrinsically well that it is authentic? What's the process like for you?
Yeah, most of my first drafts are mostly dialogue between characters, as I generally don't know what's going to happen until I start writing. I've got a rough idea. Like, I knew how I wanted the story to end, more or less, and I knew I wanted a couple of scenes in there, and then it was just a matter of finding my way to each scene. I mean, a few of the characters I didn't even know were going to be in there until I sort of, we need this fella to do that. Like, Darren was never, but he just turned up.
Yeah.
Like, he was just there in the first scene where him and Bobby are sort of getting the grog, and then it's like, how are they going to get out of the medical centre? Oh, Darren could be in there, and that would make a nice little. Yeah, and that's just basically how that's how my process works most of the time. Like, I'm definitely not a planner.
So it's problem solving.
So I'll write. I find dialogue the easiest thing to write. So if I write the dialogue, the conversations between characters, that generally, what would be the most logical thing to happen next is two people are talking, and then from there I can go, that could lead to this, and then once I've got to the end, once I work out how the story's going to go and get to the end, then I can go back in and add in all those nice little scenes of sitting by the campfire with the stars and smoke wafting and all that sort of stuff. If I haven't put that already in as they're talking, I'd just go back and add that in. So it's definitely characters first, and that having the landscape. Well, I knew it was where it was going to be set. I knew the landscape, so the characters just came out of it naturally. So, like, Gabe, Darren, and Case are part of that landscape, whereas Amin and Courtney aren't.
Really are not.
So you've got that. That was the two. There was the idea of having someone who knew what they were doing and someone who was, that place was completely terrifying to them, because I've seen people get out there and freak out. We were stopped at the Paynes Find Roadhouse one day. We were doing a bit of a drive around the place as I was writing this story, and this poor truckie from Perth, I think he just basically got off the airplane, got his work visa, and was given a truck and said, "Here, take us out to Mount Magnet," and that was it. And this poor fellow was just absolutely panicked because he'd blown his phone up, plugging it into the 24-volt charger by mistake, and he had no idea where he was. He knew where he was going, but he didn't have his fuel card wouldn't work, and he was panicking. I said, "Mate, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to Mount Magnet." And I said, "You'll be fine, just stay on this road. It's not that far. It's only like 300 kilometres away," which would not, to him, was like, not that far. What are you talking about? It's a mile. I'm like, "Look, mate, you'll be fine. You've got your big truck, you've got plenty of fuel. Just get in there, get to Mount Magnet, and then there'll be a landline there somewhere you can ring work." Because this was at night, so his work was closed. I said, you'll be fine. He was terrified because he got off that highway and all you could see either side of him was bush. And, you know, someone who's not used to that, it's the same as me going into driving the first time I drove down to Perth. Bloody hell, that was... No.
So, but, yeah, Gabe as a character, it was very fabulous, really very fabulous. Like, we've got a couple of members, actually one member who's watching from home. So thank you everyone who's watching from home. Thank you for tuning in. One of our members, her father was a dogger. And so,
oh no.
Yeah,
No,
this is great. She and her siblings all bought the book and read it and thoroughly enjoyed it. And she contacted me online and was saying this was fabulous. This was so authentic. The attention to detail in Gabe and his procedures and processes and the way he knew the landscape and also I think it was really beautiful to have a connection. Gabe was really paying attention to both flora and fauna. It was a fabulous read. Have you done any of this kind of work yourself?
Yes. So, when I was still out on Gabion Station with my wife at the time, we were getting slammed by dingoes and wild dogs. So as part of that, we went and did the courses. So I've done the course to make the 1080 baits, and we went to courses where there was a couple of doggers showing us how to lay traps and things and how to lace them properly and all that sort of stuff. I never had much luck with the trapping thing. I was too casual and I just think, oh, bung it in, she'll be right. And it just does not work like that. So that whole first part of the book, the first couple of chapters was set and gave up to show how meticulous and careful he is to make sure that it's all spot on, because I wanted him to be able to use those skills later on, but not for dogs.
Yeah.
So that was the whole reason. That was the whole point of showing him in that thing, so that when he does this later on, using these same skills for doing the same thing, but just catching a different type of dog, it wasn't such a big surprise that, he managed to outsmart them. So, and it is, it's an art form, and if you don't know what you're doing, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Some people do it better. Some people do it better than others, and it's just one of those nasty jobs that needs doing when you're out there. Like he says, we buggered up the balance, and now we've got to fix it.
Yeah. Yep. That was something really interesting about Gabe as well. Like he, as I said before about the moral ambiguity around this character, like he was fabulous. He was a really likable character, but he was doing some terrible things. He was running grog into a dry community. He was setting up dog traps on private land and then on reserve land. So, these are not very likable qualities or, actions. Yeah. But then you're able to, I think that was what was so beautiful about the human experience of this character, because then when his motivation comes through and you realize his motivation, it was, I really enjoyed Gabe's story unfolding.
Yeah, like I say,
No, you continue.
I was going to say, not much of that was very well planned out, because the frog running came about because I needed him to be doing something to not as a reason as to why he just wouldn't phone the cops when when he found me. Like, why wouldn't you just go take him to the nearest cop shop and tell him what's going on? Well, he needed to be doing something, so I didn't want him running drugs, because that's drugs are a level above grog in most people's eyes.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. You've got this borderline alcoholic fella who no one really questions his drinking, but then you've got a dry community that have made the decision to turn off the grog. And it was, I think Courtney has a sort of realisation, she can't get a drink in this community for perfectly good reasons. They made the decision. But every weekend down at Northbridge, there's fights and brawls and all the things, and anyone can get a drink anywhere they like. So it was a really nice way. And actually, the fellow who did the sensitivity read from the Indigenous side, Bill Bennell, he said that's a really nice. You've got Courtney thinking about things, and he said that's a really nice the way you've done that. And I thought, well, that wasn't technically planned, but I just thought, well, what would Courtney think coming from a city, especially for nurse if she'd done a stint in the emergency ward, because most of their business is drunken idiots, and then suddenly go up into this community. So it was Yeah, so he needed to be dodgy because otherwise he'd just call the cops.
Yeah.
And I was, and the, it was the same thing. The way he was running Grog sort of played into it later on. So originally I was going to get him to hide the kid in there, but then I realised, well, the kid would be dead in 10 minutes just from heat. So that's not going to work. So I had to put something else in there instead.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is
Which
yes. Sorry, keep going.
I was going to say, which gets back to that authenticity, because if you haven't been out there inside a vehicle without air conditioning, you probably wouldn't think about that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it's a great hiding spot to smuggle the kid out of the station. Put him in this toolbox, and then away you go. Well, yeah, he'd be dead very quickly because it's 48 degrees out there, and you're stuck in a steel box.
Absolutely. Yep.
I just want to know how you controlled this story, because there's so many pathways in this story that you could have followed and been authentic and been wonderful. How did you narrow it down to what you managed?
Were you able to hear that, Michael?
But perhaps give us a summary. It was a bit.
How did you manage to control the storyline when it could have been?
How did I?
Yeah, how were you how did you manage to control the storyline, because you had so many moving parts in this?
I got stuck halfway through it. I started writing this in 2017 in October. Ridgeview had just come out. My publisher, ANU, had resigned on the day that Ridgeview came out, which was completely unrelated, I'm sure. And so in the meantime, while I was waiting for that to publish, I'd written 2 other manuscripts, one about a sheepdog and one about Python. I didn't have any luck with those. And I thought, well, the next one I'm going to try and write something a bit more exciting. The idea is to have a constant flow. You're always writing, trying to keep the next. So you got somewhere for the next story. If someone goes, well, what else have you got? I got halfway through Wild Dogs and I just got stuck. It was unwieldy. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I hadn't actually been I've never been to Gascoyne Junction or Murchison Settlement. So we jumped in the ute and went for a drive, did camping, and it was really good because I could sort of get an idea about distances and how long and all that sort of stuff. And I nearly got to the end and it was just too unwieldy. The bloody policeman was in the way. It just wasn't working. So I basically went back to the middle to where it all starts blowing up and started again. And I wrote it. I'd moved it all into Scrivener, the writing program Scrivener, which has got a really cool feature. Yeah, you can put scenes, like you got scenes, so you can write a scene in like a card, and then you can zoom out to like a corkboard view where you've just got all these scenes lined up, and you put a little summary on the front of each one. So then I just basically shuffled. They're all color coded, so every character had a certain color. So Darren was green and Courtney was red or whatever, and I could just sort of see what as we jumped from point of view to point of view. And I found that really handy. But no, I was ready to just bin the lot there for a while, but it was an effort and it was a struggle. It just involved a lot of shuffling and rewriting and just basically reading through it and no, that doesn't make sense. I'll go back to there and put that bit over there and there we need. So that's why it does jump around a bit in time. Like it's not a continuous because we jump back to see Courtney watch something just after seeing how Gabe saw it fold out. So, and that does come from Andrzej Sapkowski again, the Witcher writer. People are surprised when I say how much a fantasy novel has sort of played into the way this Outback thriller reads because he does that too. One of my most favourite scenes he does is that there's a huge big on-field battle, and very rarely are we in this battle. We're actually in the nursing tent, so it's almost like an episode of MASH. And as people are coming into the tent, the doctor's fixing them. So we find out what's going on in the battlefield without actually being in the battlefield. So I just thought it was really clever. So
yeah. So what's your experience been like with with working with editors? Like, have you had to kill many darlings in this book? You know, with
not so much in Wild Dogs because I'd spent a lot of time and it was quite polished.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how we're able to get. I think we signed in September and the book was released on the 1st of February. With COVID and Christmas breaks and everything that went in between. I'd already had a cover and a first set of edits back before I'd even signed the bloody contract. So that's how keen they were to get it out in a hurry.
Yeah.
With Ridgeview, because that was my first manuscript I'd ever written, first attempt at writing a novel. There was a lot of stuff in there that we deleted. Did all those flowery descriptions of stone tanks, windmills, and that. Beautiful, beautiful writing. Beautiful. Not needed. We just cut it down to a few lines. But then we sort of the word count didn't change, but I reckon there was nearly 10 to 15,000 words in Ridgeview that just got deleted, and then more character stuff got put in, a bit more background to certain characters and things like that. But I love working with editors. I love having that guidance and feedback, and I quite like being able to push back a bit too, like saying, oh no, this is why this has got to be here for that reason, and then they're fine with that too. But having that fresh set of eyes, and especially if the editor is not familiar with maybe the setting or the scene, or even WA, the difference between WA and the eastern states is crazy. Like
the landscape,
one editor didn't. Well, in the way we talk, like one editor didn't know what blue metal was. I went, blue metal. I don't know what else you call it. It's just blue metal. Road base. Oh, road base. Okay. I said, we're not calling it road base. It's blue metal. WA. It's blue metal. It was really eye-opening actually. And I found the same thing at Ridgeview, just explaining things to people. Especially Ridgeview, because there was a lot of how stuff works on the station, which is sort of what I wanted to do when I wrote it. It was really good because I had editors who knew nothing about farming or stations or whatever, and they could tell me if there was too much or too little. I didn't understand what's the difference between a ram, weather, ewe lamb, hobbit, all that sort of stuff. So I just sort of that all went to sheet because it was just easier than having to explain everything like a textbook. I love the editing process. There was a good video I saw the other day about plotters and pantsers. You know, your plotter will have it all planned out first. Your plotter will have it all planned out first, and pantser won't. But the pantser loves the editing process or doing the revisions and going back, whereas the plotter sort of doesn't quite enjoy it as much because they've already had a plan. I definitely love editing. I prefer editing over writing because I generally don't know what's going to happen until I finish. And then when I go back to the second draft, I know what's going to happen. Like, I know what I wanted to say, so now I'm just basically polishing.
Yeah.
And even if that means deleting chapters and whatever else, that's fine.
So, writing a crime like this, and we had some pretty heavy topics in there. You know, people smuggling, police corruption. Thank you. Yeah. Did you have, to write with these sorts of topics? What kind of research did you need to do for this? And did you have any mentors that were able to assist you with authenticity and things?
No, not a lot. I'd researched on how someone from Afghanistan might get to Australia.
Yep.
Read a few articles on that. But it was always more about the relationship between the characters rather than the how and why of people smuggling and drug smuggling and all that sort of stuff. It was never going to be a story about a big international crime, even though that's part of a big international crime ring. We never sort of see who it is or how they're doing it in great detail. It's just sort of, it's just people say, because that was never the story. The story was what two people do when they find themselves in a big heap of trouble in the outback and how they're going to get themselves out of it. No, not really. And with the police side of things, not really, because the same thing, it was like, well, what would the copper do? Like, even though it may or may not be procedurally correct, like Parker probably shouldn't have gone off with Gable on his own, he should have called it in, but then that would have been a very boring story. So, but at the same time, I had to make it so that there'd be a good reason as to why he wouldn't call it in, and that's why he's that sort of a copper. He's just the old school type bush cop where, someone needs their head thumped in the pub because they've been a dick. Well, they get a head thumping in the pub, and that's So no, I actually didn't do any research with the coppers, and just the bare basics for asylum seeker side of things. Yeah. But I really wanted to focus more on the authenticity of Amin as a character, and Darren and communities. So that was more important to me than the actual technical side of things.
Yeah. That would be quite a conversation too, wouldn't it, if you did have a mentor in the police force and you're like, so, if you were a bent cop, how would you do this?
Yeah, so how would you hide a thing? Yeah, that's it. Like, I know writers like Fleur McDonald, she has a friend in the police force that gives her advice, but then she's writing about it. She's writing about a outback policeman doing his job, so she needs to get it right. Whereas Whereas I wrote about a guy who was thrown into a situation where he wasn't expecting, and well, we got to get it sorted. So
yeah, that's right. And I suppose Gabe and part of their journey is that they're not actually meant to be aware of how that's all happening, and it's all yeah. So the climax was very climactic. This was a massive ending to this book. And this kind of talks into the question that you posed before, Paddy. You know, there were many key players happening in this ending. This must have been a lot of fun to write. The ending. Did you?
Oh, it was horrifying. No, because it was like I knew how I wanted it to. Well, I knew how I wanted it to end. So I'm assuming everyone there's read the book. Like, I don't want to put any spoilers. So it was always going to die at the end. Like that, from the minute I started writing, Gabe was going to die saving the others. Yeah. That was his redemption arc. Gabriel redeemed. Hearn means hunter. So he was a redeemed hunter. That's how it came up with his name.
Nice.
But my publisher Bev loved him so much. She's like, "Does he have to die at the end?" I went, "No, well." I never thought about it. So we changed the last line to, it was originally "then he was gone" to "close his eyes."
Yeah.
Thinking, well, if it doesn't go off well, that's fine. The ending's fine. But if it does go off well, leads into the next one. So I've just finished writing the next one. So Gabe makes a comeback in that one. He survived, and it's dealing with the fallout. But
that's great.
Well, this is assuming the publisher likes it. She hasn't seen it yet, but it's sitting with my agent to read and give me some feedback.
We'll get a petition going.
Yeah, that's what I thought. No, the ending was, as I said, it basically gets back to that whole shuffling scenes and making sure it. And I didn't want everything tied up in a nice little bow. You finish the books, the story ends, and then I spend the next 3 chapters explaining what happened to this character and what happened there and what happened there. And I just find that, like, the story finished. Gabe, they got away. Gabe died, or was supposed to die. End of story. And I didn't want it all tied up, and I want it left uncertain, because that's what happened to these poor buggers in the detention centre.
Yeah,
like they don't know what's going to happen from day dot. So I wanted it left like that. And it also saved me a lot of writing as to work out what would happen. But now I've sort of shot myself in the foot, because there's now a second one which I had to work out what's going to happen after that.
Yeah. So this is quite different, so not necessarily related to the book, but you're a TikTok user.
Well, reasonably, I got on there during harvest last year.
Yeah. I watched it. Yeah, that's great. So how important do you think it is for contemporary authors to utilise these sorts of social media platforms?
I don't think it hurts, but I would advise against going on there in the belief that you're going to sell 1,000 books out of it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't do it unless you really want to, because people can tell when someone's there because they think they have to be there. Like, if you like using Twitter, just use Twitter. If you like using Facebook, use Facebook. If you don't like any of it, don't do it. Like, I think you have to be authentic. Like, it's no good trying to create, like I said before, creating this persona, like Michael the author, and then go and do some stuff and then sort of put a different hat on when you're doing something else. So all my stuff is it's just me. So if it clicks with people, great. If it doesn't, well, so what? But I won't be changing anything. Like, I had one blow up the other day about cheese of all things. Couldn't believe that. 8-second video on how you separate slices of cheese. Like 140,000 views. I'm like, awesome. I'll jump on board this. I'll do a quick audiobook review of Wild Dogs, which I did in the tractor seat. Put it up. 400 views. Like, if 1% of those people who saw the cheese video went and bought the audiobook, that'd be awesome. But no, it doesn't work like that. So you just go and have fun and post stuff. And I try not to get into too many arguments anymore. My introduction to social media was back in the days of the live export controversy, because that's what we were doing. We were growing sheep and we were running an export depot, and there was a lot of stories out on social media and stuff. which weren't quite right. There was a lot of stuff on there that was right, and there weren't very good things being said for good reason. But there was also a hell of a lot of rubbish on there, and there was a big push to get more farmers and stuff on social media, which has actually had a really good side effect. Is when times are tough now, whether it's drought, flood, or whatever, or just crisis or whatever's going on. There's a whole community online that are sort of teeing each other up and supporting.
Yeah.
But I know when we went through the drought in 2006, 2007, 2 years of just ridiculous drought. There was nothing online, and so you're out on a farm with maybe a couple of neighbours that you might see at the pub, but the pub's not the best place to go if you're feeling a bit down. It's like, but nowadays, if something's going on, whether it's like say floods or fires or whatever, there's a whole community online. So yeah, and the same goes for the writing community. Like there's a big online writing community, so you can sort of tap into that, and you've got your support network there.
Is it? Have you found it to be a interesting vehicle to communicate with fans and readers of your book and things like that? Like, do you get people message you and give you, their view of your book and things like that?
I'll get Twitter messages and Facebook messages, and
Yep.
or also people will tag me when they've reviewed a book. They'll tag me in it and put it up or whatever, or they'll say I really enjoyed that, or that's good. It's good to talk to people. It's really nice. Because if you can tell the author you like their stuff, because they might be having a shit day, they can't finish their page, or they can't, and all of a sudden this message comes through, and you go, "Oh, I really like that story. That's awesome." It's like, maybe I am doing the right thing here.
Yeah, you mentioned that actually in the back of your book and your acknowledgements. You say that when you wrote Ridgeview Station, that it was people contacting you and saying how much they enjoyed it, really encouraged you and pushed you to do more manuscripts. Yeah.
I saw someone. I'd read a good idea, which I haven't done yet, but I meant to, because it was, like I said, it was a long time between drinks between Ridgeview and Wild Dogs, and I was getting quite annoyed with the whole. And I think that's a lot of where Gabe's attitude came from. I only realised this in the last few months as I've been talking about it. Like, he's just fed up. Like, just piss off and leave me alone. Like, I was getting to that stage. Like, I'm just about done with it. And then, because I had a Wild Dog sat on an agent's desk for nearly 18 months before Alex finally read it. Yeah. So it was on one agent's desk for 8 months, and then she resigned from editing. So I was like, oh, that's 8 months down the drain. And then it sat on Alex's desk for nearly 10 months. And she'd said, like Alex said, look, I'm a very slow reader with manuscripts, so if you want to send it elsewhere, by all means. I said, no, I'll wait, it's fine. But I was getting a little, come on, hurry it up. Yeah. But when she did read it, it all happened very, very quickly, so that's fine. And it makes a good story of these things. So that's where, someone said a really good idea, print out all your nice reviews, all your nice comments, print them out, and when you're feeling down, open up this little folder, and you've got all these little nice reviews, nice people saying nice things about you, and because you do forget, like you're sitting there typing and it's not happening, and you've written some absolute rubbish, and you're like, oh, what am I doing this for? And then you read that and go, oh, no, they like that, it's obviously must be doing something right.
Yeah, yep. So what's next for Michael Trant then? So you're working on the next thing for Gabe.
Yep. So it was Wild Dogs was signed with a 2-book deal, which was great, but also very terrifying because I had nothing in September. Like when we signed with this, I was like, oh, I've got to write another one very quickly while editing Wild Dogs up and getting ready to publish.
Yeah.
And that's when Bev suggested, he's a great character. Can we keep him around a bit? So, to be honest, I hadn't really thought about it. So then it started, well, what would happen maybe 2 years down the track? All of the dust has settled. What's Gabe doing? And he's probably not handling things very well. He'd done some pretty bitch. He killed bloody near 12 people. So he's not.
Yeah, that's so true.
And it actually ties back into the second chapter where he's talking about that slow burn. You don't have time to think. Fires and floods, they all happen so quick. But the drought, it eats away at you. So sort of Gabe's been hiding out as what he's done has been eaten away at him. And I mean, he's still in a detention centre and stuff. So so I finished. As I said, my agent, she's got the manuscript at the moment, reading through it, and then get back to me in the next week or so. And I'll polish it up and send it to Penguin in June. And then after that, I guess I've already got ideas for another 2 stories involving Gabe. It's basically coming up with the idea and presenting it to Penguin and say, hey, how about this? And hopefully they like it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically the plan. Just keep writing these outback thriller mystery type stories for a while, because Bev, who we went with Penguin, my publisher at Penguin, she said, look, I don't take on many new authors, but I do focus on the outback, or I focus on the thriller crime type genre. So if you want to develop that, sign with us and we'll build you as a writer. So, well,
that's
I
awesome.
actually didn't mean to write now. I didn't actually mean to write an outback thriller when I wrote Wild Dogs. I was just writing something where stuff happened a bit quicker. And so I thought, well, maybe if we actually have a crack and try and write something, who knows what will happen.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Michael? Moment? Yes.
I was interested. I read a lot of thriller stories, and I like to be, can't put the book down. And the thing I liked about your story, you kept putting little things in there, and I'm thinking, what's that going to do? And it was only later on in the thing that I thought, oh, that was the bloody thing I was thinking about 40 pages ago. Then you'd have another one that really got me in.
So laying these breadcrumb kind of things.
Laying those traps.
Yes, laying these traps for your readers, yeah.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, so was there more to the question, or that was more an observation?
I think I missed the last half of that question. The sound dropped out. There's more people coming home, jumping on the mobile tower, I think.
Oh, okay.
But about breadcrumbs and...
Yeah.
I think the technical term for that is foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing.
Basically, so when something happens, it's not a big surprise. You can look back and go, oh, that's where that came from. Even though you might not realise it, a lot of authors do it. And if you read a book a second time, quite often you'll go, oh, that's where that came from. He'd already mentioned that, or they'd already mentioned that earlier on. And it gets back to Andrei Sikorsky. That leave no sign, leave no trace. He does that too. Like, he'll put a line in and he'll keep using that same line.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's a payoff at the end. Or it might even be like the book's title in, say, short story versions. That's the book's title is a line that goes through. So you could have quite easily called Wild Dogs, Leave No Sign, Leave No Trace, or something like that. And that, so the foreshadowing, I honestly thought the line from Chase about don't mix the dates up with turkey, I just thought that was a dead giveaway. I just thought that was so obvious to me. And a couple of people who do still work in that field, they were like, I said, because I asked them, did you see the jerky coming? And they're like, I knew you were going to do something with it, because you kept mentioning it.
Yeah.
But by the time you did it, I'd already forgotten that you'd mentioned it, so it was still a surprise, even though when you look back, you can see that coming a mile away. So yeah. But yeah, it is hard when you're writing these things, because you've got to lay these crumbs, but you can't make them like too big, because you want people to be guessing all the time, but then you don't want it to be the obvious twist as well. Like, sometimes it's very, people who do it, like, people who can do that probably are very clever, I think. And I don't know, this manuscript at the moment, there's a perpetrator. I've got to try and hide who it is while they're in a crowd of people, so you've got to try and throw in all these red herrings without it being too obvious that it's a red herring. So it's very hard. But thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that not so much the question, but I just really loved the connection with Courtney and Gabe, and how she reminded him of his wife.
Yeah.
To me, it felt like it led him to forgiving himself a bit for what had happened.
Yeah, could you speak a little bit about that dynamic between Gabe and Courtney, and how he was able to recognise so many good qualities and traits of Valerie? And it was just mentioned that perhaps this was part of his redemption, how he forgave himself.
Yeah, it sort of helped as to why he would feel as though he should stick around and help. Like, it was just a nice, because it allowed me to talk about Valerie without actually talking about Valerie. Like, he knew he'd lost his partner. He knew he was still mourning for her. He knew that's why he was living the way he was, basically passing out drunk every night and trying to stop dreaming about what happened and all that sort of thing. So being able to link that back to Courtney meant I could keep hinting at it, so that when we find out what actually did happen to Valerie, it's not like all of a sudden we're talking about his dead wife. It's because we've been leading up to that the whole time, and that just explains why he was such a loner and just didn't really care anymore. So he needed a reason as to why he should care. And being reminded of your dead partner is as good as any, really. Like, because especially for people who've lost a partner, I can't imagine how they get through it in the first few years. Because especially when you're like working together side by side, and all of a sudden they're not there anymore. It'd be hard. It'd be horrible. So we had to get Dave back from that sort of dark place he was in. It was one of the handy stepping stones to do that.
Yes.
I was thinking that with that relationship, it wasn't just Dave that was affected by Valerie's death, but Bobby, who developed a severe drinking problem after what he'd seen, and how Dave came to the realisation that he wasn't the only one, but he was contributing to Bobby's demise, as it was, through alcohol to dull his nerves, his feelings. That whole arc of, his grog running while it was filling a niche wasn't helping the healing. Valerie's death.
Because I was very nervous about the whole grog running side of things, because it's perpetuating stereotypes. So I wanted a very good reason as to why Gabe would be supplying grog to a dry community. So it wasn't planned. Like, I'd already written the grog running in before I got to the reason. The reason came when I think Darren was explaining what happened. It was a throwaway line. Bobby found him. I thought, Bobby found him. Well, that could be why he's drinking. So, and it's turning that stereotype on their head, because Bobby turning to alcohol is no different to anyone else who's gone through trauma. So, and it's the same thing with Darren. He doesn't drink. So again, you're turning that stereotype on its head. So I thought, if I'm going to write grog running in dry communities and things like that, I'm not going to go down I'm not going to go down the obvious line, because again, you don't want to perpetuate that stereotype. That's how that came about, completely by accident with Bobby's. But once I found it, I knew it was a good little nugget and reason.
And then I guess throwing the money he made from the grog running back for Melissa to fix up the shop. Destroyed by a drunken Bobby. That whole.
And that gets back to his redemption arc. He sort of realised that maybe I'm not doing quite the right thing. What can I do to fix it? So throwing the money's the easiest and simply throw money at things. But it's all about getting Gabe to realise that maybe he's not on the right path and he's got to fix it.
Just a brilliant book. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Would make a great movie.
Yes, I thought that too. It's very cinematic qualities. Absolutely. So will we see some familiar faces in the next book? I know you can't give too much away, but will some return?
There'll be mentions as obviously Gabe. I'm not too sure yet, because like the temptation there is to bring the gang back together, get the band back together, but it has to be for a good reason. Like, you can't suddenly just have in turning up out of detention, because in all reality, he'd probably be in there for 10 years. Like, if the reality is, there's people who've been in detention for 5, 6, 7 years. The only reason the Viola family's going home is because of change of government. So, like, you know what I mean? Like, so as much as I'd love to put next to Gabe again, that's not going to happen for a long time, because that's just the reality of Australia at the moment. So, so there'll definitely be throwbacks and callbacks and all that sort of stuff. But at the moment, it's mainly Gabe dealing with the fallout, and there could be some people looking for payback, because he killed quite a few people. So,
There was a really beautiful moment at the end between Courtney and Darren. And there's potential there.
You're not the first person to hint at a romance, but I don't write romance.
Yeah. Romance through the eyes of Gabe. Goodness.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if Hannah did mention this to you at all, but a reading. How do you feel about reading a passage for us? Because I think there's something so beautiful about hearing an author's words.
Yeah, no, look, I'm getting used to it because I do get asked this a bit now, and I keep reading the same passage, which is one of my favourite ones.
Yes, yeah, good.
Only because it has a dig at the Yanks.
Yeah.
So this is the first night where they set up camp and they're discussing what's been going on and the plans from here. So sitting down having a drink, and Amin is telling them how he got here. Bear with me, I am no Rick Herbert, who is the narrator of the audiobook. He did a brilliant job on that. But so Gabe said after a sip from his cup, how does an Afghani wind up out here? Afghan, Amin said. What? I am Afghan. The Afghani is our currency. Okay, said Gabe, not quite understanding why that fucking mattered. How does an Afghan end up out here? Very unexpectedly, Amin poked the coals with a stick, sending a cloud of sparks into the sky. Shadows flickered across his face as he spoke. When you asked if I was a terrorist, for a brief moment I almost laughed, Amin began. For they are the very people who have led me here. My brother was a teacher and translated for the Americans during the war, but when they started to withdraw, he was no longer required. His face hardened. They abandoned him to his fate, and somehow the Taliban learned of his treachery as they proceeded. They found him and killed him, and as punishment and a warning to others, they hunted down anyone else in his family. Bloody hell, Gabe breathed. I thought the Yanks won the war and got rid of them all. Nobody wins a war, Gabe. Though the American-led forces did remove them from power, and many fled to Pakistan. But many have since returned, biding their time. It was going to be very bad when all the international forces leave. So they came after you. We feared they would, yes. I am also a teacher, and they would have suspected me as well. We sold everything we had to afford safe passage via people smugglers into Pakistan. Couldn't you ask the Yanks, go to their embassy, tell them about your brother? It is not that simple. Before he was killed, my brother had been trying to get an American visa. He knew it would be dangerous once they left, but for 2 years, nothing. And then it was too late. Bloody Seppos, Gabe said. Seppo? Americans, Seppos. A blank expression greeted him, and he sighed. Well, shit, like a septic tank. Tank rhymed with yank, so we call them Seppos. Amin gave him a confused laugh. That is very strange. Gabe pointed at tomato sauce. You want to know what we call that? I don't think I do.
Michael, this has been such a pleasure. And this book was fabulous. Our book club really enjoyed it, and we've had such great discussions about it online and things. And thank you so much for joining us tonight and being our guest author for May. And we really look forward to hearing your next book. It's when will it land on the shelf?
I've no idea yet. Yeah. Not sure. All I know I had to get it done. All I know I had to get it done. We were working on the June deadline, and that was pretty flexible too. So I'm not sure yet. Depends. Bev might read it and go, "Oh, this needs some work," or she might go, "This is awesome. We can put it out shortly." So
okay.
Who knows?
But it's so exciting.
When I know, you will know, don't you?
Yeah. That's true. So exciting to know that there's more. There's more to Gabe's story. There's more to come. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I was a bit worried about it because some people said, "Oh, it was sad to see him, but he had to die at the end." I'm like, "Did he though?"
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Same thing. People are like, "Oh, I was so sad to see him dead," or "I wish he hadn't died," and I'm like, "Has he?" But
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any last?
Yeah, he'll be around for a while.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Any last questions, Michael? Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been fabulous.
Not a problem. Thank you.
And hopefully we get to do this again with you in the future.
Yes, we can do it in person one time.
Yes, it'll be fabulous. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. Have a great evening.
All right.